As a driving principle of democracy and good governance, freedom of expression is a fundamental human right that allows every citizen to speak their minds freely on important issues that affect society, access information, and hold the powers that to be accountable to. But with that said, rights and freedom are not given on a silver platter. In order to instill any form of change, society should be reawakened to realize that the space is shrinking. During a public discussion on the impact of shrinking civic and democratic spaces in Zambia, organized by ActionAid Zambia with support from many other organizations, the emphasis was that citizens must overcome fear and struggle for their rights and freedom. This is how the discussion went.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to send my greetings to the government and parliament authorities, to UN missions, to embassies, to all colleagues around. But I would like particularly to make a very strong greeting to the human rights defenders in the room and to the organizations from civil society who are on the receiving end of the shrinkage of political space. I just want to bring my solidarity to each and one of you, including media, that sometimes are also at the receiving end of the shrinkage of political space. Before you wonder where this accent comes from, I'm Brazilian, and the reason I'm mentioning that is because I want to connect the debate about political space with my own personal experience to that. So I have been on that receiving end of repression at the very end of dictatorship in my country, on the early 80s. I will not tell how old was I then or not now, but we've been, as a students' movement then, severely repressed, detained, some of our comrades killed. After that, I saw the side of the state failing to respect rights. After that, I saw the failure of the state to protect rights. So working with farmers' movements in Latin America, so many of those leaders killed by landlords, not directly by the state, but by landlords, an absolute lack of accountability or action by the state in those killings. So there's another failure, fundamental failure of rights. And I also have seen, since I took the job as Secretary General of ActionAid, see this particular phenomena of the shrinkage of political space for organized civil society. So I've been in this job for 5 years, and I'll tell you some stories of what kind of situation we have faced in all continents, including Europe, and I'll give some examples there as well. Just to reinforce the point, and I want to greet Cida at this stage, that it is a global phenomenon. It's not southern, it's not only in Africa, it is all around the global north and global south. I would like firstly to also mention one important thing. It's true that the political space for organized civil society is shrinking. Or if you want to be clear about that, we are suffering attacks. Civil society has been attacked on its democratic and civic rights. But it's also true that there is a number of people in the world that never had any civic rights. And those are the human rights defenders at the front line. Those are colleagues, those are comrades, those are friends that never experienced any democratic right on their lives, even if the country was democratic, because they were completely marginalized politically, economically, and socially. So let me just start by paying tribute to the 321 frontline human rights defenders killed in 2018, just to give a dimension of it. Sadly, for me as Latin American, most of them in my region, 126 in Colombia, 48 in Mexico, 26 in Guatemala, and 23 in my country, Brazil, according to Frontline Defenders report. And there's also a big number in Philippines, just to give you a sense of that assassination, which happens alongside with 625 reported cases of violence against human rights defenders. So 321 people killed, 623 reportedly attacked. And we know that it's underreported. It's just what people got to know. So those are the people that never really had civic space. And I think one of the first fundamental challenges we have as organized civil society is how to bridge our work towards civic rights and democracy with the realities of those people that never had democracy, never had rights. And I think that's a fundamental challenge for all of us. I also want to give another data in terms of the dimension of the situation, which is only 22 countries, and I just checked with Dr. Google this morning. Apparently we are in 196 countries in the world. Only 22 countries are considered to have an enabling space for civil society and strong safeguarding for civil society. That's a Civicus report of 2018. Out of those 22 countries, 19 are in Europe, 2 is on Oceania, and 1 in the Americas. And I suppose it's Uruguay. I'm sure it's not Brazil. So that gives you a sense. Only 22 out of 196 countries are considered to be open to civil society. So that's the size of the challenge in front of us. My sense is this incredible level of repression on the side of not respecting human rights or allowing complete obscene intimidation attacks on leaders by other parts of society by not protecting the rights of citizens is fundamentally driven by power. So the fundamental issue behind it is an issue of power. It's about people that have power, either economic or political power, holding to that power and not allowing others to change and shift power relationships. And that happens in many levels, and I would like just to emphasize 4 of them. I think one of them is about authoritarianism. So that's probably one of the strongest things we are seeing in this continent and other continents. So we have a very authoritarian governments that don't want to have open space for debate. It's that simple. So therefore, they will crack down and they will crash into civil society voice. So you're going to have political elites holding to power through basically repressing the ability of others to express themselves. Another element on power is about the unchecked power of corporates and national elites. So when you come to issues related to natural resources, access and control over land, or bargaining power of labor unions, that's where you see a fundamental correlation between the power of the elites and the people that are repressed. From those 321 people I mentioned were killed last year, 77% of them were related to land conflicts, either mining or landlords, or indigenous rights, or environmental rights. So that's where you see the power of economic elites, either a big landowner or landlord, or a big mining corporate hits into the shrinkage of political space. Another big element, a third one, is about extremist and fundamentalist groups. We cannot forget about them. They exist, and there is fundamentalism for each religion. Let me be clear about that. It's fundamentalist Christians, it's fundamentalist Hindus, it's fundamentalist Muslims. So you have an increase of fundamentalist groups that also contribute to the shrinkage of political space with an agenda of changing societal rules. Example given, repression over women on sexual and reproductive rights in my region, in Latin America. That's very related to that. I think a fourth element, which is kind of new, is a deep political polarization of our societies. So we are in a place in the world where the polarization became the rule, where political debate is about basically destroying the opponent, not about dialogue. So therefore, we have the destruction of the opponent as a paradigm. Sometimes that's also related to alleged tribalism, but that's another fundamental element behind that. So the way ActionAid has experienced the attacks on civic and political space, I think first we did a research which is out there with 11 countries. Some of them we kept anonymous because the political space is so bad that we cannot quote the countries, not to put our colleagues at risk. But freedom of association is definitely very strongly attacked by many ways. Bureaucratization, defamation, surveillance, harassment, but more strongly on new requirements for registration of NGOs, a very, very strong restricting memorandums of understanding defining what civil society can do or not, or where they can go or not. So that's a very restrictive space as well. a number of new administrative and tax punitive rules in many countries, restrictions on foreigners' presence and foreigner funding, restriction on human rights work. So we have all kinds of cases. In those cases, mostly what we are seeing is an attempt to control or completely destroy the ability to organize. So to give an example, two quick examples, we were kicked out of Pakistan last year, November, and we still don't know why. I received one of the most interesting letters in my life, and I'm happy to share. Was just 3 lines. Line number 1, you are deregistered. Line number 2, you have 60 days to pack and go. Line number 3, you have 90 days to appeal, which doesn't make much sense in terms of timing, but anyways, you can ask the Pakistan government what they mean by that. In the case of Uganda, our office was surrounded by the police, the military cordoned off. All computers were captured, staff were interrogated just because of a moment of political debate about a third mandate for the president. That's how it has happened. And I have many other examples. I just want to keep 2 of them to give you a sense. So it's basically legislative and regulatory restrictions, a lot of new regulation on foreign funds, arbitrary search and seizure of equipment. So that's happening everywhere. And the most important here is it's starting to become a trend. So some of those regulations, they are becoming a trend in terms of national propositions at national parliaments, in terms of how you use money, how much money can be. If, for instance, in one of the countries that we work, they basically say, if you have more than 10% of your resources coming from outside the country, you cannot talk about human rights. So that's a way to keep the human rights debate squeezed financially. So another way, one is regulation, another one is strangulation through finances, so that we are dealing with. Another area of repression we are dealing with is the freedom of expression and right to information. So we have a lot of new legislation that's criminalizing freedom of expression, that's criminalizing the ability of people to speak out, and also making the access to information more complicated and more dangerous in many countries. And Guatemala is an example. You have a strengthening of the ability of the state to prosecute human rights defenders for defamation and to prosecute media for defamation. So there is another trend here that relates to the right to information that's equally important. Freedom of assembly and the right to participate in public affairs. That's probably one of the most, one that all of us see quite consistently. Criticize the government. The level and the ferocity of the social media attack brings you down. And if you are an organization that depends on public reputation, that's your weakness. So in the case of Brazil, for instance, ActionAid is funded by Brazilian individual givers. The more Brazil protests against the withdrawal of rights, the more attacks they have on social media that they can actually end up into putting their sustainability at cause. Another example is Italy. I promised at least one European example. So we have had organized right-wing young people groups going to the ports of Italy to try to stop boats to go out to the Mediterranean to do rescue of migrants from this continent. So it's within the society. So it's not all about state or private sector. It's also a big element of the public that is now espousing different values. Values of xenophobia, misogyny, racism, that I think we have to confront if you want to confront the structural causes of shrinkage of political space. So our response has been a combination of direct engagement. In many cases, we just resisted and we kept going. So one example is in Uganda, after that cordon off, we sued the government and we won on court. In the case of Tanzania, the office of the president came to our office and said, if you launch this report about land grabs tomorrow, we are going to close you. We said, please come and close. We'll launch anyways, because we are a national organization. We have rights to be here, and we managed to confront it directly. We have had various types of indirect confrontation to shrinkage of political space, through lobby, through mobilizing allies, and the allies are very important. I want to say that to the diplomatic corps particularly. Whenever we are in those situations, the relationship with foreign representations, with UN agencies, with other allies, with international allies is very important. Litigation, Media and communications, absolutely fundamental. At the end of the day, it is a dispute in the public, so having a clear strategy to media and communications. Alliances, none of us, national or international NGO, is equipped to resist to those attacks alone. It's just impossible. It has to be a coalition. It has to be a diverse coalition. There is no space for being selfish when we are on that level of attack. Legal, financial resources, as well as security and psychosocial support to staff. Staff gets extremely affected in those situations. You have to be able to support. Advocacy is another one. And let me just finish by saying two things that I think are important. One is, as I said in the beginning, is not only about the obligations of the state to respect rights. It's also about the obligation of the state to protect citizens from attacks from other elements in society. And those are the empowered actor that builds power with the communities, I think makes a huge difference when those situations happen. So having said that, I'm just very glad to be here with you and very glad to continue to the debate, and let us all together fight for democracy and for the rights of citizens to assemble, to associate, and to be part of the public debate. Thank you very much.